So yeah, picking up where we've left off here, I think it's a key time in our 2 days together to open up more of a conversation about where we ought to be heading as disciplines that we all represent in natural sciences and economics. And what I thought I could do to add a little bit to the conversation is give a concrete case that demonstrates both the opportunity before us and also helps drive home some of the urgency. And I was reflecting a bit. I really enjoyed the presentations this morning, and I was reflecting a little on moments when we have really rapid transformative change, which is what I'm sure we all agree we need in academia. We need to catalyze change out in the world, and how can we operate in much more of a catalytic way than we normally operate? And I know we all ask ourselves that question, and it's a tough one, but I hope I've just thrown these slides together. We had planned 15 minutes for this little session, so that's partly why we're reorganizing quickly. But I hope with a few illustrations of what's going on specifically in China, that we might be able to think in more concrete terms, and with other examples. I love the cases that were laid out this morning, so just putting more on the table about what we can do together. And then Steve Carpenter will say a few things after I will, and then we're really going to open up. And the question is, what is the role for us? And given that this isn't the time for incremental thinking, and the arena where I am most challenged in this context is in China. So working together with Steve Polasky, with a bunch of others, especially obviously in China, it's just breathtaking to see what's possible now, as contrasts in a way with what's possible in the United States. So Steve and I have been working together with a lot of others in a huge partnership globally to drive change, basically open up pathways to green growth around the world with these sorts of emphases. So in the Natural Capital Project, we've got these different demonstration projects in about 60 countries in the context of integrating, ecology and economics, the latest thinking in development planning, securing fresh water, livable cities, private sector standards, and developing, resilience along coastlines, social and natural resilience. And those are sort of points of entry where there are policy opportunities to engage and drive meaningful change in decisions. And the case I'll present that's most dramatic in terms of opportunity and driving meaningful changes in China, where you've probably all heard that since 2014, the Communist Party has declared China's dream as being becoming the ecological civilization of the 21st century. And if you haven't heard this, even if you have, it probably sounds like insanity. But you'll see in a minute, if you're not already deeply involved, how much there is going into this. So Xi Jinping is known all across the country for saying that clear land, clear waters, and lush mountains are gold and silver. We will not trade them for gold or silver. And that's become emblematic of where the country is trying to head, recognizing the devastating consequences of environmental degradation in pursuit of sort of straight GDP over the past decades in their development, especially since the opening up in the 1970s of massive flooding on a kind of biblical scale, horrible air and water quality, and endangerment even of the most iconic species like the panda. So what we're always being asked are these three questions: where and how much to protect, and how to define that very rigorously, how to secure nature and livelihoods, and third, how to move beyond GDP as such a sort of primary metric of progress. So what China's doing, and I'll just be quick but lay out a few steps they're taking to help seed our thinking, is firstly they're building a system of natural capital accounts. It's based on about 120,000 ground truthing sites across the country where they're measuring different aspects of the environment. And as Eli and others have been saying, we've got to be, Chris, thinking about the opportunity that's opening up now, the technology to measure in real time the attributes of natural capital and how it's changing. Then they also use a lot of remote sensing. Then they're using the INVEST models that I won't get into, but that translate basically natural capital stocks into predicted flows of services, and can map out at a really fine scale, at the county scale at least, across the country, things like food production, carbon sequestration, sandstorm prevention, water, in this case, water retention leading to water supply. And in all of this, the idea is to anticipate how policy interventions will change the stocks and the flows. So then they're implementing now a whole system of conservation and restoration investments. They've spent about $150 billion US over the past decade in making these investments. And we measured in that paper whether they're paying off. And in most contexts, they do seem to be paying off, leading to higher stocks and predicted flows. The investments are designed around a national set of priorities of these services here: flood control, biodiversity, sandstorm control, water purification, and just water supply for hydropower, irrigation, drinking, and so on. And about 49% of the country is in these priority zones now, where development is really going to be controlled around achieving an improvement in natural capital stocks and supply of services. So it comes down to places like this in Yunnan province, then where there's a bottom-up effort at the county scale, where there are these 5-year master plans that are developed, where people know what their national target is and how they need to feed into the target. And they also define what their own local, say county or provincial scale, or it happens at the municipal level too, goals are, and then kind of try to optimize within those constraints. And so here, every square centimeter of land is allocated to serving a particular set of goals. And then people are paid, about 200 million people are presently being paid to line up with these goals, basically, and they're being paid to restore natural capital. So this is in Sichuan province. It's mostly rural farmers, often in places that you have to hike to for a couple of days to interview them and find out how it's all going. But it's on a massive scale, and the intent is to increase this greatly. There's going to be a fund launched this summer of about 1 trillion yuan, it's about 7 yuan to the dollar, to seed new pilot investments to create a transformation in local economies and in the security of the environment in China. So the one thing that's going down is biodiversity still, and they're investing now in a new national park system for which there's been massive data analysis on the biophysical side, and now a proposition that there'll be 2 types of parks. One type that is supported mostly through ecosystem service payments, and another type that is supported more through subsidies for the sake of protecting biodiversity, without there being as clear a direct and immediate economic benefit in doing so. And then this system of green finance that they're setting up involves a new metric that Steve has been leading development of. There are other people involved, Ian Bateman and others on the economic side, and then many other colleagues. This is being tested in China now. This new metric is gross ecosystem product, looking at the total value of ecosystem goods and services supplied annually, and using that as a measure alongside GDP to both guide investments in development and in achieving security in food, water, air quality, other things, climate across the country, and also to promote or demote leaders. So that's the function. It's going to link in directly with policy mechanisms that are in place in China now. They're also implementing these green growth policies, and they connect, for example, downstream beneficiaries, such as in major cities, with upstream or upwind suppliers of benefits. And they're looking at a wide range of policies. We ran a 2-week program this past summer with heads of the NDRC Department of Development Planning to define policy, or to basically look at policies that have worked well in the US and Europe, the places they want most to learn from. And then they're trying to translate these into the Chinese context and build in new things. So there's also a big emphasis on targeting, both from a biophysical perspective and also a social perspective, where there's been a lot of interviewing of, it's on the order of thousands of households, to understand what the impact is of existing policies and how they could be improved from the perspective of achieving human development goals as well as the environmental goals. And then finally, I should say there are tons of pilots underway now and more that are being planned to test for some years, but it's usually just a couple of years before policies become kind of integrated at scale across China. So right now there are these pilot investments going on at these different scales from counties up to the national level. And they're really anxious to take advantage of the political opportunity to address just massive problems with different points of entry. And one of the key points of entry is in cities. So we're developing a lot of models now with, again, Steve in the lead here on valuing elements of natural capital in cities for helping to drive this transformation to sustainable, livable cities as one piece of a lot of other things. There's mass migration within China that I'm sure you're fully aware of, just massive urbanization rates there that are a key piece of this also. So we haven't really gotten to China's global footprint, but it would be great in our discussion to do so. In China, we don't work so much on that, the Belt and Road Initiative and overseas investments, but the intent is to try to transform policies within the country and then apply those changes in policy within China to the way overseas investments are made across Latin America, Africa, and elsewhere. So I'll leave it at that in terms of seeding our discussion with an example, but just want to thank the morning speakers again for touching on a lot of really key areas that need to be integrated into a vision for this just next phase of economics, interdisciplinary, linked with the natural sciences and other thrusts out in the world of policy to achieve what we're all aspiring to leave for our children. Thank you.